Trump tried to humiliate Obama in front of America, but he never saw Obama's silent strike coming. The tension in the nation's capital that day was already simmering like a storm waiting to break. In the crowded press briefing hall, the air carried a kind of static charge, the sort that creeps up before a lightning strike. Rows of reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, their pens hovering anxiously over notepads, fingers twitching over keyboards, and cameras poised like hawks ready to swoop. The murmur of low conversation was more a warning than a comfort. Everyone there knew it could take only one provocation for the entire room to erupt. That's the way things went whenever Donald Trump took his place at the podium. The atmosphere was never neutral, only charged, expectant, combustible. He leaned into the microphone with a certain deliberate sharpness, his eyes narrowing as they swept the room before locking on an invisible target. And then came the strike, a verbal dart meant to cut and bruise. "Barack Obama," he declared, each syllable sharpened to a point, was all words. 8 years of empty speeches, and not a single real result. That's the legacy, folks. That's the truth. The sentence landed with a thud in the quiet, like a stone dropped into a lake, and the ripples were immediate. Gasps, quiet murmurs, a few cynical smirks. The press had seen Trump wield his words like this before, turning public platforms into arenas. Some reporters scribbled furiously, their eyes darting from Trump to the other end of the hall, because that's where Barack Obama was seated. He hadn't come to spar. The occasion was meant to be bipartisan, a discussion on education policy that, at least in theory, would unite rather than divide. But politics rarely follows theory, and opportunities for spectacle rarely go unused. Obama sat quietly, hands resting on his lap, his expression composed and unreadable. His very presence was a reminder of another era, another cadence of leadership, one marked less by spectacle and more by slow persuasion. For Trump, that was an irresistible foil. A young correspondent from Missouri muttered into her voice recorder, "Trump launches opening strike at Obama." Another from Arizona drew a thick underline beneath the word mockery in his notebook. Cameras inched forward on their mounts, catching every twitch of the former president's jaw, every blink of his eye. Trump, emboldened by the subtle ripple of attention, pressed on, his voice carrying an almost triumphant edge. The media worshipped him. They adored the man. But what did he really leave behind? A weaker country. He promised hope. Well, hope doesn't pay the rent. Hope doesn't keep our families safe. We're stronger now, because we've moved past his failures. His palm struck the podium with a dull thud, punctuating the sentence like an exclamation mark. Some reporters nodded, not in agreement, but in that mechanical way people nod when something is familiar, predictable. This was Trump's rhythm. Attack, amplify, repeat. Across the room, Obama shifted only slightly, straightening his tie, a movement so minimal yet magnetic that it pulled several pairs of eyes toward him. A camera from CNN zoomed in tightly on his face, lips pressed into a thin line, a posture that conveyed no flinch, no rush, only patience. The kind of patience you see in someone who has been through storms before and knows exactly how long they last. A veteran journalist from Texas whispered to her colleague, "If he speaks, it's going to be a headline." The reporters could feel it. The contrast. Trump's energy was all jagged edges and restless motion, while Obama's was still water, silent, deep, deceptively calm. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Trump pointed toward the side where Obama sat. There he is, Mr. Eloquence, Mr. Promises. 8 years of sweet talk and nothing to show for it. People are tired of it, tired of him. The words sank like a hook baited with provocation. Reporters turned, some more subtly than others, their eyes now fully on the man who had yet to speak. Obama didn't leap to respond. He leaned forward in his chair, fingers lacing together, his gaze briefly meeting Trump's across the crowded hall. The look was almost surgical in its precision, calm, unhurried, unshaken. Trump saw it and smiled as if he'd already won. See? Nothing. Quiet as always. That's what I mean. He has no answers, just silence. But those who had followed Obama's political career closely knew that his silences were rarely empty. They were chosen, calculated. The pause before a move that mattered. One of the younger reporters whispered, "He's loading the chamber." The former president finally stirred. A slow push of his chair against the floor produced a faint scrape that sliced through the low hum of the room. He rose, not with haste, not with hesitation, but with the gravity of someone who knew the room now belonged to him the moment he stood. The photographers, usually jaded by years of similar spectacles, instinctively tightened their grips on their cameras. The air thickened. Even those far from politics could have felt it through their screens. Something was shifting. Obama walked to the microphone with an even, unhurried gait, adjusting it slightly as he reached the podium. He didn't speak at once. He paused, long enough for that pause to become its own kind of statement. Silence, when used well, doesn't merely hold space. It commands it. Trump folded his arms, leaning back with a half smile that looked less sure now, more like a mask adjusted too quickly. And then, finally, Obama spoke, his voice even, measured, not loud enough to clash with Trump's bombast, but pitched perfectly to cut through it. "This isn't about me," he began, his tone conversational yet weighty. "It's about the country we all claim to serve." It wasn't the blow everyone would later remember, but it was the first stone placed on the board. Trump chuckled into the mic, shaking his head, trying to swat it away like a mosquito. "There it is. Country this, country that. More speeches. People want action, not poetry." A few reporters murmured. A freshman correspondent jotted down, "Contrast between noise and stillness." Obama didn't rise to the bait. He simply shifted his stance, one hand lightly touching the podium. "Action without a vision," he said softly, "is just motion without meaning." The words didn't boom, but they landed. Heads turned toward Trump, gauging the effect. For a second, the smirk faltered, then reassembled itself like a curtain closing too quickly. Trump shot back. "We are winning now. Look at the markets. Look at jobs. People are proud to be Americans again." Obama tilted his head, the way a teacher might when hearing a student half right. "Pride," he replied, "isn't measured by numbers. It's reflected in how we treat one another when no one is watching." A subtle stir moved through the crowd. This was not a rally. No one clapped, but you could feel the balance tilting. The exchange continued, like a slow duel fought with two entirely different weapons. Trump's was speed, sharpness, and force. Rapid jabs meant to overwhelm. Obama's was patience and weight. Every response a deliberate stone added to a growing structure. "You left us divided," Trump said. "Division starts at the top," Obama answered, "long before it ever reaches the people." "I rebuilt strength," Trump insisted. "Strength without wisdom," Obama returned, "is just another name for recklessness." The back and forth was not loud, but it was magnetic. Across the country, viewers paused mid-coffee, mid-shift, mid-conversation. Something was unfolding, not the chaos many had expected, but a slow and visible transfer of gravity in the room. Reporters who had begun the event scribbling down Trump's jabs were now transcribing Obama's replies. The narrative had turned like a tide, and Trump, ever a man who fed on dominance, could feel it slipping. His gestures grew sharper, his voice louder. But the louder he became, the calmer Obama stood. Then, sensing control fraying, Trump went for the throat. "You weren't just weak," he barked, his finger stabbing the air. "You were this country's biggest mistake." A sharp inhale swept through the room like a gust of wind. That line had gone deeper than most. Pens paused. Eyes darted. Even some of Trump's allies stiffened slightly. Obama didn't flinch. He adjusted his cuff, stepped forward, and let the sound of his shoes mark the moment. It was the sound that told the room, "The answer is coming." He reached the podium again, his movements precise, his face unreadable, his hand resting lightly on the microphone. For a long second, he didn't say a word. He just looked at Trump, long enough that even the smirk began to look forced. And then, in a voice that carried more steel than volume, he said, "I think we were invited here for a reason that has nothing to do with your grudges." The sentence didn't roar, but it cut. It turned the current of the room away from Trump's onslaught and back toward the reason they had gathered at all. Trump scoffed, waving him off. "Here comes the lecture, folks." But by then, the contrast was etched in the air like a line drawn with a hot blade. One man storming, the other standing like a wall of calm. The press briefing hall was thick with expectation long before the first word was spoken. It was one of those Washington afternoons where the air didn't just hang, It buzzed. Journalists filled the cramped space like bees in a hive, their pens tapping impatiently, cameras focusing and refocusing, microphones stretching forward in a forest of black foam and metal. Everyone sensed that something was going to happen, the way animals sense a coming storm. The tension was almost ritual by now. Whenever Donald Trump took command of a podium, the atmosphere bent toward confrontation. He stepped forward with that unmistakable confidence, leaning toward the microphones as if they owed him a debt of attention. His eyes swept the room, paused, and then narrowed with the precision of a man who had picked his target. "I've heard this 1,000 times," he said, his voice carrying a theatrical sigh. "He'll talk about unity. He'll talk about hope. But none of that ever became real." It never did. The target, of course, was seated only a few feet away, Barack Obama. Cameras shifted toward him, lens clicking, fingers darting over keyboard keys. He didn't move at first. No frown, no smirk, no dramatic tilt of the head. Just the stillness of someone who knew the game and had no interest in playing too early. Then, slowly, he leaned toward his microphone. His tone was even, neither defensive nor sharp. "Hope," he said, "isn't a finished plan. It's the direction on the compass. Without it, leaders walk in circles." The room reacted not with applause. It wasn't that kind of room, but with a ripple of quiet murmurs, the kind that signals something has landed. A few reporters glanced at one another knowingly. They didn't need to say it out loud. That line had legs. It was the kind of phrase that would replay well on television, that would survive the evening and make the morning. Trump's face stiffened. "There it is," he shot back with a quick, almost forced laugh. "Words. That's all you've ever had, nice words. People don't need verses. They need victories." Obama didn't so much as flinch. He turned, not toward Trump, but toward the cameras. His expression was measured, a faint echo of the same composure that had carried him through 8 years in the White House. "Words," he replied, "shape the path. Without them, action stumbles in the dark." The contrast was becoming visible like a photograph developing in a tray. Trump's volume swelled, his gestures sharpened. Obama's voice remained a steady current, each sentence chosen, deliberate. A journalist from Arizona leaned to her neighbor and whispered, "He's not pushing back. He's letting Trump overextend." The podium rattled faintly as Trump's hand struck it. "You failed this country, Barack. Admit it. Look at the American people in the eye and say it." Obama's gaze swept briefly toward the cameras, then back to Trump. His reply came quiet but carried with surprising weight. "I don't see failure in this country. I see millions of people who stood their ground even when some leaders walked away. That landed differently. It wasn't a direct punch. It was a widening of the lens. Suddenly, the viewers at home, the workers on their lunch breaks, the students in their dorm lounges, they were part of the sentence. It wasn't just an answer. It was inclusion. Trump's laugh this time was sharper, almost brittle. "You're smooth. I'll give you that. But people are tired of smooth. They want something real." Obama glanced back at him for only a heartbeat. "Real," he said gently, "isn't the loudest voice in the room. Real is what remains after the noise fades." The press began writing faster. The rhythm of the exchange had shifted from a volley of barbs to something else entirely. It wasn't volume-winning ground now. It was gravity. Insult. Response. Insult. Response. Each turn of the wheel made Obama seem less like a participant in a shouting match and more like the axis around which the moment spun. Even some of Trump's aides, standing in the shadowed corners, adjusted their posture uneasily. The air was tightening. The room was on the edge of something. Everyone could feel it. Obama wasn't just withstanding the blows. He was sculpting the silence between them, preparing the ground for something decisive. Then, without realizing it, Trump gave him exactly what he needed: space. His last outburst, louder than before, rattled the microphones and rang against the walls. But instead of dominating, it drained the room. For a heartbeat, maybe two, there was a hush so heavy you could almost hear the static in the lights overhead. Reporters froze, pens hovering, cameras tightened their frames until every crease in Obama's brow, every line at the corner of his mouth, was captured. Obama didn't seize it immediately. He allowed the quiet to breathe, straightening his posture, one hand resting on the wood, the other dangling at his side. He looked at Trump, not with triumph, not with irritation, but with the steadiness of a man about to close a chapter. And then, with a voice that carried without strain, he said the line that would etch itself across headlines before the day was done. A president doesn't earn respect by breaking people down. He earns it by helping them rise. The room stopped. Not a shuffle, not a whisper, not a single keystroke interrupted the stillness that followed. Trump blinked. His lips parted as though to summon another attack. But nothing arrived. For the first time that afternoon, the current was against him, not because of facts debated, but because the air itself had shifted. Obama didn't elaborate. He let the words sit, like a stone in clear water, ripples forming on their own. A reporter from Indiana mouthed to no one in particular. There's your headline. Another from Texas scribbled in bold. Going viral. Trump leaned into the microphone again, but the rhythm was gone. That's, he started, then stopped. His fingers tightened on the podium, knuckles blanching. Obama turned his attention back to the hall. That's why I came here today, he said smoothly. Not to trade insults, but to talk about education, about the generation that will choose what kind of leaders they deserve. The pivot was seamless, like a door swinging quietly back to its intended room. Reporters' pens flew. Their editors would be asking for clips within minutes. Trump stood stiff, lips drawn thin, eyes narrowed. His earlier grin long vanished. He muttered something off mic, but no one caught it, and the cameras didn't need to. His face said enough. The clash hadn't been loud. Its power came from imbalance. One man burning with noise, the other standing in the eye of the storm until the wind turned. For a moment, the event's original purpose, the bipartisan meeting on education, returned to its surface. But the story was already elsewhere, moving faster than any of them could track. Within minutes, that single sentence began threading its way across social feeds. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. The platforms turned into echo chambers of the line. A president doesn't earn respect by breaking people down. He earns it by helping them rise. A high school student in Fresno recorded herself reciting it into her phone. That's leadership, she said simply, and her clip soared past 2 million views before midnight. YouTube compilations stitched together every angle. CNN's close-up, Fox's wide shot, raw phone footage from a reporter's aisle seat. The thumbnails were nearly identical. Obama calm at the podium. Trump caught mid-blink. Even late-night television had its take ready by sundown. That's how you drop the mic without dropping the mic. One host joked, the audience erupting. In diners, in office kitchens, in living rooms, the sentence became conversational currency. Did you hear what Obama said? A nurse in Phoenix asked her colleagues over lunch. My mom texted it to me first thing this morning, one replied. Truck drivers in Iowa replayed the clip on a phone propped up against a salt shaker. Say what you want, one muttered. But that's how you shut someone down without shouting. A college professor in Portland murmured over his student's laptop. That's the difference. Rhetoric can be cheap, but presence? That you can't fake. Even conservative talk radio couldn't ignore it. A host in Dallas sighed into his mic. I don't like the guy, but that was a clean hit. By dawn, the sentence had split the country into familiar lines. To Obama supporters, it was a reminder of why they admired him. Measured, poised, unwilling to drag the country through the mud just to score a point. To Trump's backers, it was just another set of pretty words, lacking substance. But no one denied it anymore. The event wasn't about education policy that day, nor about Trump's opening jab. It was about how one moment of composure outlasted an hour of noise. Inside the White House, aides sifted through coverage with tight jaws. Some grumbled that it was just optics, just timing. But in the end, timing is politics. Obama left the room quietly, after shaking hands with a handful of educators. He didn't linger. He didn't need to. The sentence had already become its own messenger, crossing states and screens faster than any motorcade. The cameras had captured more than words. They had captured a shift. One leader raised his voice. The other raised the bar. And in a country used to spectacle, it turned out one quiet line could still rewrite the day. The aftermath unfolded with a sharp divide, almost like two different nations hearing two different stories. Conservative airwaves lit up first, with radio hosts from Oklahoma to Florida calling the moment nothing but polished theatrics. On one Tulsa program, a caller's voice crackled over the line with a familiar irritation. Of course, the press is lapping it up. This is what they live for. One polished sentence from him, and suddenly he's the nation's savior again. But who brought jobs back? Who fought for the working class? That wasn't him. That was Trump. Fox and Friends dedicated an early segment to the viral clip. The banner beneath them reading, Obama's one-liner spreads. But does it solve anything? One host leaned closer to the camera, voice sharp as a blade. People are acting like this sentence builds bridges. It doesn't. Borders aren't protected with quotes. Paychecks don't come from speeches. President Trump has delivered real policies. That's what counts, not wordplay. Across the dial, however, on MSNBC, the framing had a different hue entirely. Their screen flashed with the caption, Obama reminds America what steady leadership sounds like. Analysts on the panel slowed down the clip frame by frame. How he paused. How his voice never rose. How the timing of silence itself became part of the punch. One commentator observed, notice what didn't happen. No shouting match. No insult in return. Just precision. And that restraint said more than the sentence itself. Beyond the studios, ordinary Americans echoed this split in coffee shops, kitchens, and classrooms. At a senior center in Topeka, Kansas, a group of retirees circled their mugs over a worn table. That line got me, said a woman with a soft shake of her head. Reminded me of when leaders actually tried to bring us together, not rip us apart. Across from her, a man snorted. 8 years he had to lift people up. What did we get? More division. Don't tell me about speeches. I want to see results. On campuses, the debate carried a younger rhythm. In a political science lecture at Arizona State University, the professor played the clip twice before freezing the frame. Look here, he said, pointing at the still image. Notice the posture. Notice the silence before the words. That's deliberate. A student near the front grinned. My dad always says that, keep calm, and people lean in more. Another raised a skeptical brow. Anyone can string a line together. Where's the follow through? Even dinner tables became arenas. In Cleveland, a father praised Obama's composure over roast chicken, only for his son, an unflinching Trump loyalist, to jab back, composure doesn't negotiate trade deals. Their voices stretched late into dessert, mirroring 1,000 other households where the same fault line ran through. News outlets poured gasoline on the discourse. CNN looped the clip until it became part of the wallpaper of the week, dubbing it the sentence that shifted the narrative. Fox, meanwhile, hammered its audience with the idea that Americans were being seduced by sentiment over substance. Talk radio vibrated with both praise and derision. On NPR, one host distilled the matter. This isn't about one sentence. It's about what we expect from those who lead us. Some want vision. Some want tangible outcomes. This moment is forcing the country to decide which matters more. The echo chamber spilled into unexpected corners. In a Detroit barbershop, clippers hummed while the barber held up his phone for a waiting customer. See that? That's class. Didn't even need to raise his voice. The man in the chair frowned. Class doesn't fix potholes. I want someone swinging a hammer, not reading poetry. Soon it became obvious. The sentence was no longer just a viral clip. It had turned into a mirror. People weren't only hearing his words. They were projecting their own values onto them. For some, it became a shorthand for unity, a promise of something steady. For others, it was a sugar-coated distraction. And yet, even the most hardened critics could not deny one fact. The headline had changed. For the first time in weeks, the conversation wasn't orbiting around Trump's insults or jabs. It revolved around Obama's restraint. Whether they loved it or hated it, the nation was talking. Ferociously, endlessly. By the weekend, the debate was no longer just about two men on a stage. It had metastasized into a broader, almost timeless question. What do we truly want in a leader? At a diner in Omaha, a waitress paused mid-refill as two patrons dissected the moment over eggs and toast. One man stirred his cup slowly. That sentence? It reminded me of my grandfather. He always said a real leader shows his worth by how he treats those who can't give him a thing in return. The other tore his toast, scoffing. Sentimentality doesn't win. Grit does. Give me someone who fights, not someone who flatters. This pattern repeated in stadiums and sidewalks. At a high school football game in Wichita Falls, Parents leaned against the fence, phones in hand. "This is what our kids need to hear," a mother whispered, showing the clip to her friend. "Lift people up. That's what matters." Another shrugged. "Or maybe what they need is a dose of reality. Tough love builds a country, not slogans." Despite the divide, a thread ran through. Dignity. Respect. The very definition of leadership itself. The sentence had poked at something deeper than party lines. It became sermon material in an Alabama church where a pastor echoed the phrase from the pulpit. A leader doesn't prove his worth by tearing down. He proves it by raising others higher. The congregation murmured their amens. In a Spokane civics class, a teacher scrawled the line on a whiteboard. "This isn't about whether you prefer red or blue," she told her students. "It's about asking, do we want our leaders to lift us or break us down?" The room erupted into a respectful, hour-long argument that spilled past the bell. Managers quoted it in morning meetings. Parents repeated it over homework. Some mocked it mercilessly online. Conservative message boards turned it into punchlines. "Lift people up? How about lifting the national debt first?" Memes flourished, mocking its simplicity, but their existence only proved how far the sentence had traveled. A host in Phoenix sighed into his microphone. "I can't stand that it's everywhere. You turn on a TV, open your phone, it's there. And that's the problem. It's sticky. It's like a song you hate but can't stop humming." That, perhaps, was its power. It didn't thrive because it was revolutionary. It thrived because it was familiar. It echoed something parents say to children, coaches say to teams, mentors whisper to the unsure. Leadership is service, not self. One night in Little Rock, a group of veterans sat beneath the dim glow of a VFW hall television. When the clip ended, the oldest among them, a Vietnam veteran, cleared his throat. "I never voted for the man. But that line? You'd want a young soldier to hear that before heading into the field." His buddy shook his head. "Pretty lines don't win wars. Fighters do." But even he admitted with a reluctant chuckle, "Damn thing sticks though." Editorials mushroomed nationwide. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran with, "The force of quiet. When one sentence speaks volumes." The Dallas Morning News posed a direct challenge in an op-ed. "Do we choose leaders who build or leaders who break?" And through it all, the man at the center of it did not campaign on it. No interviews, no grand tour, no amplification. He let the words breathe on their own, unattached to a machine. And that restraint gave them an authenticity spin doctors could not replicate. Because what had made it powerful was not just the phrasing. It was the moment it was born. It was unscripted. It was quiet. It came after the noise. And that is why it lingered. By the time the dust settled, America wasn't just arguing over a sentence. It was wrestling with a mirror. What do we admire? What do we follow? In homes from Portland to Pittsburgh, parents began weaving the phrase into their own teachings. A father in Nebraska leaned across the table to his teenage daughter. "Remember that when you lead your school club, it's not about knocking people down. It's about pulling them up," a mother in Spokane told her son. That's the difference between being in charge and being a leader. A good leader leaves people taller, not smaller. Even detractors conceded. It had shifted the temperature of the nation, if only for a moment. That ability to turn a room with calmness rather than fury, that was a kind of strength not easily ignored. The event, in the end, wasn't about a scorecard or a poll bump. It was about clarity. It reminded people that the figures they most respect, whether they are presidents, teachers, parents, or neighbors, tend to share one habit: they raise others up. And that may explain why it stuck. Because somewhere inside, we know the truth of it. The people who shape us are rarely the ones who shouted the loudest or cut the deepest. They're the ones who steadied us when the ground shook. So ask yourself, who in your life do you remember? The one who sneered, or the one who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself? That is the same choice our politics faces, our workplaces face, even our friendships face every day. Leadership doesn't require a podium. It requires intention. The next time you're tempted to win an argument by tearing down, try this. Pause. Let the silence stretch. Then choose a sentence that lifts. Watch how much longer it lasts. Because real strength isn't in the decibels. It's in the dignity. Real strength isn't measured by how many you push aside, but how many you carry with you. And that is why that quiet moment, That single sentence still travels, not because it belonged to a politician, but because it belongs to anyone willing to live it.